Let's walk on the wise path.
Have you ever stopped to think if you're truly the one in control of your decisions? Or even more mind-boggling, why did you click on this video in the first place? Is it because you chose to? Or is it because something deeper inside your brain, hidden from your conscious self, made that decision for you? Sounds wild, right? Well, what if I told you that a medical procedure known as split brain surgery has flipped everything we thought we knew about our minds upside down? And even more, it questions the very idea of free will. Yeah, we're going there today. By the end of this video, you'll be questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself. So, stick around, because trust me, you don't want to miss this. Let's start with the basics: split brain surgery, also known as callosotomy. On the surface, it might sound like something straight out of a sci-fi movie surgically cutting the brain in half, but it's actually a real medical procedure that has helped thousands of people suffering from severe epilepsy. So, why would anyone agree to have their brain split in two? It all comes down to managing seizures that can't be controlled by medication. In some cases, these seizures spread rapidly from one hemisphere of the brain to the other, causing debilitating and dangerous episodes. To prevent this, surgeons cut the corpus callosum, which is the thick bundle of nerve fibers that acts like a bridge between the left and right hemispheres. This procedure doesn't stop the brain from functioning. In fact, both hemispheres continue to work, but they do so independently, without the constant communication that normally happens through the corpus callosum. For most patients, this significantly reduces the severity and frequency of seizures. But here's where it gets fascinating. When the brain is split, it's not just the seizures that stop. The way the person thinks, acts, and perceives the world changes in ways no one could have predicted before the first surgeries were performed. One of the first successful callosotomies was performed in 1936, but it wasn't until the 1960s and 1970 that scientists like Dr. Michael Gazzaniga started to explore what happens to patients after the surgery. Their studies revealed that each hemisphere could act on its own, sometimes even without the other side knowing what's going on. This discovery blew the doors open on our understanding of brain function and consciousness. It turns out that the left and right hemispheres have specialized tasks: language processing in the left, and spatial awareness and creativity in the right. Normally, these two sides work in harmony, but when that communication is cut, each side starts doing its own thing. Think of it like a sports team. Imagine a football team where the offense and defense are suddenly unable to talk to each other. They can still play the game, but it might get messy because neither side knows what the other is planning. That's kind of what happens in the brain after a callosotomy. Each side is still functioning, but there's no teamwork. The results are mind-blowing, giving us a deeper understanding of the brain's complexity and raising big questions about who we are and what it means to be in control. Now, let's dive into what happens when your brain's hemispheres start working independently after a split brain surgery. This is where things get really interesting. You've probably heard about the idea of the left brain versus the right brain, right? Maybe someone told you that if you're logical, you're more left brain, or if you're creative, you're more right brain. While it's true that the left hemisphere tends to handle tasks like language, math, and logic, and the right hemisphere is more involved in creativity and spatial awareness, the real story is a lot more complex. In a typical brain, these two halves are constantly communicating through the corpus callosum, sharing information and working together seamlessly. But after a callosotomy, this bridge is severed, and the two sides of the brain start functioning more like two separate minds. They can each process information and make decisions, but they don't share that information with the other side. To understand this better, let's go back to that famous experiment I mentioned earlier. A split brain patient was shown two images at the same time, a chicken claw to his right eye and a snowy scene to his left. Since the right eye sends information to the left hemisphere, where language is processed, the patient pointed to a chicken when asked what he saw. Makes sense, right? But here's the kicker. When asked why, he also pointed to a shovel, which was linked to the snowy scene in his right hemisphere. The patient's left hemisphere, the part responsible for speech, couldn't explain it properly. Instead, it made up a story about needing the shovel to clean out the chicken coop. The patient didn't know what his right brain had seen, but his left brain, always trying to make sense of the world, came up with a plausible explanation anyway. This reveals something profound about how our brains work. Even when we don't have the full picture, our brains are wired to believe we do. This interpreter module in the left hemisphere is always crafting narratives, even if they're not entirely accurate. It's as if your brain is a storyteller that's determined to make sense of the world, even when it's missing crucial details. This raises the question, if the two hemispheres of the brain can function independently, are they two separate consciousnesses? Are there two yous in there, one in each hemisphere? Or is it that the brain, when connected, gives us the illusion of being one unified person? It's mind-boggling, but it shows how little we truly understand about what makes us. Us? Okay, let's take this one step further. If your brain can operate as two independent units, does that mean you're really in control of your actions? Or is free will just an illusion created by your brain to make sense of everything? This is where things start to get a little unsettling, but stick with me because it's absolutely fascinating. For centuries, humans have believed in free will, the idea that we're fully in control of our actions, decisions, and destinies. We like to think that every choice we make, whether it's picking a career, deciding what to eat for lunch, or even clicking on this video, is completely our own. But split brain surgery shows us that might not be entirely true. Remember alien hand syndrome? This is a real condition where, after a callosotomy, one of the patient's hands will start doing things on its own, like unbuttoning a shirt or reaching for an object without the person being aware of it or wanting it to happen. It's like the hand has a mind of its own, and in a way, it does. One hemisphere of the brain controls that hand, and without communication from the other side, it's free to act independently. If one part of your brain can do something without the rest of you knowing, it begs the question, how many of our actions are really under our conscious control? And if they're not, then what does that mean for free will? Here's where the science gets even more intriguing. Studies have shown that many of our decisions are made by our brains before we're even aware of them. Yep, that's right. Your brain has already decided whether you're going to pick up that coffee cup or send that text message before you even consciously think about it. So, are we really the ones making decisions, or are we just along for the ride, rationalizing our actions after the fact? This isn't to say we have no control over our lives, but it suggests that our sense of having complete free will might be more of a comforting illusion than a reality. Think of it like being a passenger in a car. You're sitting in the front seat, you can see where the car is going, and you might even be able to influence the driver a bit. But ultimately, you're not the one steering. In the same way, your conscious mind is aware of what's happening, but it's not necessarily in control of every move. Now, let's get a bit more philosophical and talk about something called emergence. Emergence is the idea that when you put a bunch of simple things together, sometimes something completely new and unexpected emerges. Think of a flock of birds. Each bird is just flying around on its own, but when you look at them all together, they form a complex, moving pattern in the sky. That pattern is something new. It's not something you could predict just by looking at one bird. This is what scientists believe is happening in our brains with consciousness. Your brain is made up of billions of neurons, all firing and communicating with each other in incredibly complex ways. Each neuron is like one of those birds, just doing its thing. But when you look at all those neurons together, something new emerges, you. Your sense of self, your consciousness, is an emergent property of all these neurons working together. But here's the kicker, because consciousness is emergent, it's also fragmented. It's not as unified as we like to believe. Split brain research shows us this clearly. When the two hemispheres of the brain are disconnected, it's almost like two different consciousnesses emerge, one in each hemisphere. Each side can perceive the world and make decisions, but they're not aware of what the other side is doing. This makes us question what consciousness really is. Is it just the result of lots of little processes happening in the brain, or is it something more? And if it's just an emergent property, then how much control do we really have over it? Are we the authors of our own thoughts, or are we just the product of all these processes happening in the background? The idea of consciousness as an emergent phenomenon challenges our traditional views of self and free will. It suggests that while we feel like we are in control, a lot of what we experience as us is actually the result of processes happening deep within our brains. Without our conscious input, we might be more like a mosaic than a single, unified picture, lots of little pieces coming together to create the illusion of a whole. So, after all this talk of fragmented consciousness and the illusion of free will, you might be feeling a little powerless. But don't worry, there's some good news here too. Your brain is incredibly adaptable. This is thanks to something called neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. In other words, your brain can change, and you have the power to influence those changes. Neuroplasticity means that while a lot of our decisions and behaviors might be driven by subconscious processes, we're not completely helpless. We can train our brains to form new habits, learn new skills, and even change the way we think. It's like a mental workout. Just as you can strengthen your muscles by going to the gym, you can strengthen your brain by practicing new ways of thinking. One of the best ways to tap into neuroplasticity is through mindfulness and meditation. These practices help you become more aware of your thoughts and feelings, giving you the opportunity to change them before they become automatic. By regularly practicing mindfulness, you're essentially rewiring your brain to be more present and aware, which can lead to more conscious decision-making and a greater sense of control over your actions. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is another powerful tool for harnessing neuroplasticity. CBT helps you identify and challenge negative thought patterns and replace them with more positive, productive ones. Over time, this can lead to lasting changes in the way your brain processes information, helping you break free from old habits and behaviors that no longer serve you. Neuroplasticity also has profound implications for healing and recovery. For example, stroke patients who lose function in one part of their brain can often relearn how to move or speak by training other parts of the brain to take over those functions. This ability to retrain the brain is what makes neuroplasticity such an exciting area of research. The takeaway here is that while we may not have complete control over every decision or action, we do have the ability to shape our brains and influence our future decisions. By understanding how neuroplasticity works, we can take an active role in shaping our thoughts, behaviors, and even our sense of self. Alright, so after all this talk about split brain surgery, free will, and neuroplasticity, what can you actually do with this knowledge? How can you apply it to your life in a way that helps you grow and improve? First and foremost, self-awareness is key. One of the most important things you can take away from all of this is that your brain is often on autopilot, running on subconscious patterns that you might not even be aware of. But here's the good news. Once you start recognizing those patterns, you can begin to change them. The next time you find yourself reacting in a certain way, whether it's getting angry, feeling anxious, or reaching for that second slice of cake, pause for a moment and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is this really what I want, or is it just a habit? By practicing self-awareness, you can start to take control of those automatic behaviors and make more conscious choices. Next, rewire your brain through consistency. Neuroplasticity shows us that the brain can change, but it doesn't happen overnight. It takes consistent effort to form new neural pathways and break old habits. The good news is that small, consistent changes can lead to big results over time. Whether it's meditating for 5 minutes a day, practicing gratitude, or working on a new skill, the more you do it, the stronger those neural connections become. Empathy is another big takeaway. Understanding that everyone is driven by subconscious processes just like you can help you become more empathetic towards others. The next time someone cuts you off in traffic or snaps at you in a meeting, remember that they're likely acting out of habit or emotion, not conscious intent. This can help you respond with patience and understanding, rather than frustration or anger. Finally, live intentionally. One of the most powerful things you can do is to align your actions with your values. By becoming more aware of your thoughts and behaviors, and by actively working to shape your brain through neuroplasticity, you can start to live a more intentional, fulfilling life. It's not about being perfect or controlling every aspect of your mind because, let's face it, that's impossible, but it's about making small, conscious choices that move you closer to your goals. In the end, we may never fully understand the mysteries of the mind or have complete control over every decision we make. But by embracing the power of neuroplasticity, cultivating self-awareness, and practicing empathy, we can take an active role in shaping our thoughts, behaviors, and ultimately our lives. So go out there and start living more intentionally, because while you may not have full control over your brain, you certainly have the power to influence it. So, where does this leave us? Are we the masters of our own minds, or just along for the ride? Well, it turns out it's a little bit of both. While our brains are constantly working behind the scenes, making decisions we aren't even aware of, we still have the power to shape our thoughts and behaviors. It's not about having complete control. It's about working with our minds to live more intentionally. Remember, your brain is like a team of employees working towards a common goal. Sometimes they make decisions without your input, but with practice, you can become a more hands-on CEO